I've been asked what I said when I walked into that kitchen. People want to know if I screamed, if I flipped the table, if I lost my mind. The answer is no. I didn't say much at all, but by sunrise the next morning, what I did to my son, most people would call it cold. I call it necessary. Welcome back to Dad Raw Revenge. Get comfortable, and remember, the people in these stories had every chance to behave themselves. They just choose wrong. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from. Subscribe, and hit that like button. Trust me, you're going to love it here. Now, let me start from the beginning, because if I don't, you won't understand why I don't regret a single thing I did. My name is Paul Jarrett. I'm 63 years old. I've been married to Angela for 30 years, and up until 11 days ago, I would have told you my family was solid. Not perfect. Nobody's perfect, but solid. The kind of solid you build over decades of showing up, paying for things nobody says thank you for, and loving people who sometimes make it very difficult to love them. My son Xavier is 29. Grown man, broad shoulders, firm handshake, good job. A good chunk of which, I'll be honest with you, came from doors I personally opened for him. But we'll get to that. Xavier married into the Dalton family about 2 years ago. His wife is fine. Nice enough girl. But her family, her father Dale Dalton, her mother Patrice. Let's just say the first time I shook Dale's hand, something in my gut said, "Watch this one." I shook it anyway, smiled anyway. Because that's what you do when your son is in love. That was my first mistake. Now, 11 days ago I flew out to Denver for a series of business meetings. Nothing unusual. I travel 4, maybe 5 times a year, for work. Angela knew I was going. The whole family knew. What nobody knew, including Angela, was that my last meeting got canceled on day 10. I could have stayed, explored the city, ordered room service, and watched cable like a man with no responsibilities. Instead, I booked the first flight home. I didn't call ahead, didn't text. I wanted to surprise her. 27 years of marriage, and I still liked surprising my wife. Sue me. I landed, grabbed my bag, and drove myself home. It was a little past 3 p.m. on a Tuesday. Now here's the first thing I want you to notice, and stay with me on this, because the details matter. When I turned onto my street, I saw Dale's car parked outside my house. That silver Buick he loves like it's a personality trait. Parked right there in my driveway, like he paid the mortgage. I felt that thing in my gut again. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe they'd just come for lunch. Maybe Xavier had them over. People visit. It's normal. I was tired and reading into things. I parked, grabbed my bag, and walked to the front door. The house was loud. Not loud in a party way, loud in a layered way. Like 2 different worlds were happening under the same roof at the same time. From the back of the house, from the direction of the kitchen, I could hear laughter. Loud, comfortable, relaxed laughter. Dishes. Conversation. The sound of people who had absolutely nowhere else to be and not a care in the world. And from the living room, silence. The wrong kind of silence. I pushed the door open, and I saw her. Angela was on the floor, not sitting, not resting. On the floor. Her back was against the base of the couch, her legs out in front of her, and her hand, her right hand, was pressed underneath her nose. Her white blouse had a stain on it that I recognized immediately, and I felt my stomach drop straight through the floor. Blood. Her eyes found mine the second I walked in. And I want to tell you something. I have seen my wife cry at commercials. I have seen her cry at other people's weddings. I have seen her cry because a song came on the radio that reminded her of her mother. I have never in 27 years seen her look the way she looked at me in that moment. Like she had been waiting. Like she had been holding on. Like the moment she saw my face, something in her finally said, "Okay, he's here. You can let go now." And that is the image that sealed everything that came after. I did not panic. I want to be clear about that. I am not a man who panics. I dropped my bag, crossed the room, got down on one knee, and I called 911. Right there. No hesitation. While the dispatcher walked me through keeping her calm and upright, while I was checking her pulse and wiping blood from her face with my bare hand, I could still hear them, from the kitchen, laughing, my 29-year-old son, and Dale and Patrice Dalton, laughing like they were at a dinner party, like nothing in the world was wrong, like my wife wasn't 11 feet away from them bleeding on the living room floor. I want you to sit with that for a second. I really do. Because I had to. The paramedics arrived in 8 minutes. 8 minutes that felt like 8 years. They came in fast, Professional, calm, the way people are when they've seen real emergencies and they know exactly what to do. They checked her vitals immediately, and the lead paramedic, young guy, couldn't have been more than 32, name tag said, Briggs, looked up from the blood pressure cuff with an expression that told me everything before he even opened his mouth. Mr. Jarrett, he said quietly, your wife is in hypertensive crisis. Her pressure is critically high. This didn't just happen. This has been building. She needed attention before this point. He said it professionally, clinically, without accusation. And I looked toward the kitchen, where the laughter had finally gone quiet. And I felt something shift inside me. Something that had been hot and frantic a few minutes ago went very, very still. Cold, actually. I held Angela's hand until they lifted her onto the stretcher. She squeezed my fingers. I squeezed back. Twice. Our thing. 27 years of our thing. Then I stood up, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the kitchen. Now, before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something about me. I am not a violent man. I am not a man who screams or throws things or makes scenes in his own home. But I am absolutely, without question, a man who handles things. And it was time to handle something. If you've been listening for a while, do us one quick favor. Subscribe. A lot of people listen without ever doing it, but it costs you nothing and means everything to us. Thank you, genuinely. I've walked into a lot of rooms in my life. Boardrooms where millions of dollars were on the table. Hospitals when people I loved were fighting for their lives. Courtrooms, churches, gravesides. I've walked into rooms that changed everything and rooms that changed nothing. But I want to tell you, nothing, and I mean nothing, has ever felt like walking into that kitchen that afternoon. The laughter was gone, finally, like somebody had reached over and clicked it off with a switch. The three of them were just sitting there, Xavier at the head of the table, Dale to his left, Patrice to his right, surrounded by plates of food and glasses of sweet tea like they'd just finished a perfectly lovely Tuesday afternoon meal. In my house, while my wife bled on my floor, I stood in the doorway for a moment, just stood there. I've learned over 63 years that the most powerful thing a man can do when he's furious is slow down. Every instinct in your body says speed up, raise your voice, move fast, make them feel the size of what they did. But slow is scarier. Slow means you're in control. Slow means you've already decided what's going to happen, and nothing they say is going to change it. So I stood there, slow, quiet, and I looked at my son. Xavier stood up. I'll give him that. He stood up the moment he saw my face, which tells me somewhere in that 29-year-old brain of his he already knew. You don't stand up like that unless you know, Dad, he started. I held up one finger, just one, and he stopped. I turned to Dale first. Dale Dalton, silver-haired, tan, the kind of man who'd never worked a job he didn't also own. He had his hands folded on my dining table like he was chairing a meeting, like he was comfortable, like he belonged there. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I said, and I kept my voice so calm it probably scared them more than shouting would have, "Get out of my house." Dale blinked. Patrice put her sweet tea down. Xavier opened his mouth. Dad, just let me explain. I'm not talking to you yet, I said. Still calm, still slow. I said, get out of my house. Both of you, right now. Dale shifted in his chair and did the thing I knew he was going to do. He tried to be reasonable, tried to be the measured, rational adult in the room. He leaned forward slightly and said, Paul, I think if we all just take a breath here. Dale. He stopped. I didn't ask for a breath. I didn't ask for a conversation. I asked you to leave my house, and I'm only going to say it one more time. Now here's the part I need you to pay attention to, because this is where it gets interesting. She grabbed her purse, touched Dale's arm, and gave him the look that wives give husbands when they're saying, not now, not here, let's go. Dale got up slowly, the way men do when they want you to know they're leaving by choice, not by instruction. As they passed through the living room on their way to the door, they saw her, Angela, on the stretcher now, oxygen mask over her face, IV line in her arm, Briggs and his partner working efficiently around her. Patrice stopped walking. Her hand went over her mouth. Dale went completely still. And I watched them look at my wife, at the blood still faint on her collar, at the way her eyes were closed, at the tubes and the equipment, and I watched the color drain out of both of their faces. Good. I needed them to see that. I needed that image burned behind their eyelids. They left without another word. The front door clicked shut behind them, and suddenly the house was very, very quiet. Just me and Xavier. He was still standing at the kitchen table, hands at his sides, jaw tight. He had his mother's eyes, always had. And right now those eyes were doing that thing where they couldn't quite decide whether to be defensive or ashamed. I walked back into the kitchen slowly, and I sat down, right across from where he was standing. I sat down, folded my hands on the table, and I looked at him. "Sit down, Xavier." He sat. "Talk," I said, "and I want all of it." He exhaled, ran a hand over his face, and then he started, "And here's where I need you to really stay with me, because what came out of my son's mouth in the next 4 minutes rearranged everything I thought I knew about that afternoon." Xavier told me that Dale and Patrice hadn't just stopped by. They'd been planning this visit for 3 weeks, waited specifically for me to be out of town, came with paperwork, actual paperwork, related to a property I own, a commercial building I've had for 19 years, that I've always told Xavier would be his one day. Dale had somehow gotten it into his head that one day meant right now, and that with the right pressure on Xavier, they could get him to sign documents that would begin transferring controlling interest of that property. While I was in Denver, without my knowledge, without my signature. I want you to think about that. I want you to really let that sit. These people came into my home, sat at my table, and attempted to manipulate my son into signing away a piece of what I built, while I was 1,100 miles away and my wife was in the next room. I kept my face completely still. Inside, different story entirely. "And your mother," I said quietly. "Where does she come in?" Xavier looked at the table. "She overheard," he said. "She came into the kitchen about 40 minutes after they arrived. She heard what Dale was saying, and she wasn't having it, Dad. You know how she is. 30 years I've known exactly how she is. She told Dale directly that the property wasn't Xavier's to sign," he continued. "That you hadn't agreed to anything, that they were out of line coming here like this. Dale tried to talk over her, and she got loud. Mom got loud and Dale got loud, and it went back and forth for a few minutes, and then she stopped." He paused. "She said her head was pounding. She's feeling dizzy. She excused herself and went to the living room, and I thought." He stopped again. "I was going to check on her. Dale started up again, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in, and I got pulled back in." He couldn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I sat with everything he'd just told me for a long moment. The kitchen was so quiet, I could hear the paramedics talking in low voices in the next room. I could hear the sound of the stretcher wheels on my hardwood floor. Then I said, "So let me make sure I understand you correctly." My voice was different now. Even Xavier noticed. I saw him straighten slightly in his chair. "Your mother told your father-in-law, in her own home, that he was out of line." He talked over her. It escalated. "She told you she didn't feel well, and you went back to the kitchen." Xavier said nothing. "You went back to the kitchen," I repeated. Not a question. Just the fact of it, sitting between us on the table like something neither of us could move. "Dad, I didn't know it was serious." Xavier. He stopped. "She has high blood pressure," I said. "She has had high blood pressure for 6 years. You have known that for 6 years. The paramedic, a stranger, told me tonight that she needed attention before this point. A man who has never met your mother in his life understood the urgency. And you," I stopped myself, because I felt it. That thing you feel when you've raised someone, loved someone, sacrificed for someone, and you realize in one terrible moment that somewhere along the way, something didn't take. I stood up, and I said the last thing I was going to say to my son that night. "I don't know who you've been spending your time becoming, but he is not the man I raised." I walked out of the kitchen, back to my wife's side. I took her hand, and I didn't speak to Xavier again for the rest of the night. But I want you to understand something. The silence wasn't weakness. The silence wasn't me letting it go. The silence was me thinking. And when Paul Jarrett gets quiet, when he gets very, very still, that's when you should be worried. There's a particular kind of quiet that settles over a house at 2 a.m. Not peaceful quiet. Not the kind you get after a good meal or a long laugh or a night where everything went right. I mean the other kind. The kind that has weight to it. The kind that presses down on your chest and makes every small sound. The refrigerator hum, the clock on the wall, the distant sound of a car passing outside, feel louder than it should. That's the quiet I sat in that night. Angela was asleep in our bedroom. Finally. It had taken the medication, the lowered lights, 3 of my pillows arranged exactly the way she likes them, and about 40 minutes of me just sitting on the edge of the bed holding her hand before her breathing evened out and her face, that beautiful exhausted face, finally relaxed. I watched her sleep for a long time. I thought about 30 years. I thought about the woman who married me when I had more ambition than money, who worked beside me when we were building everything from scratch, who raised our son with more patience than I ever had, more grace than he deserved, and more love than either of us probably recognized in the moment. I thought about her on that floor, and then I stopped thinking, and I started moving. I went to my desk in the study, sat down, opened my laptop, cracked my knuckles, and I went to work. Now, I need you to understand something about me before I walk you through what happened next. I am not an impulsive man. I don't make decisions in the heat of the moment, and I don't do things I'll have to undo later. Every single thing I did that night I had already decided in that kitchen, when Xavier was still talking, and I was sitting across from him, with my hands folded and my face completely still. By the time I sat down at that desk, I wasn't angry anymore. I was decided. And there was a profound difference between the two. The first call I made was to the bank. Yes, at 2 a.m., because when you've had the accounts long enough and you're the primary holder, there's a number on the back of your card that doesn't sleep. I've used it twice in 27 years. This was the third time. Xavier had been an authorized user on my primary credit card for 6 years. 6 years of charges I never questioned, never audited, never made him justify. Gas, groceries, dinners, subscriptions. That one weekend in Nashville he called a work trip that I'm fairly certain involved neither work nor a spreadsheet. Removed. The woman on the phone was professional and efficient. Took less than 4 minutes. She asked if there was anything else I needed. Not tonight, I said. Thank you. I hung up and moved to the next one. I moved on. Car insurance dropped from my policy before 3 a.m. The apartment. Now this one took a little more. I'd co-signed Xavier's lease 2 years ago when he and his wife moved into their place. Nice building. Good neighborhood. The kind of neighborhood that requires a co-signer with a certain kind of credit score and a certain kind of income. Mine. I called his landlord at 7 a.m. when I knew the office would be open. Man named Gary. Good guy. We'd spoken twice before. Both times pleasant, both times brief. This time I told him I needed my name removed from Xavier's lease at the earliest legally possible opportunity, and that I'd cooperate with whatever process that required. Gary paused for a moment, then said, "Everything okay, Paul?" "Everything is being handled, Gary," I said. "Thank you for asking." Every first of the month, quietly, without announcement or conditions, I'd been transferring money into Xavier's personal account. It started when he was getting on his feet after college. Then it became habit. Then it became something neither of us ever discussed, because we both just accepted it as part of how things worked. I logged in at 3:15 a.m. and canceled the recurring transfer. Permanently. Not paused. Not reduced. Canceled. I sat back in my chair for a moment after that one, because that transfer represented something beyond money. It represented a version of my son I'd been quietly funding, a comfort level, a cushion, a safety net that had maybe, possibly, allowed him to make the kind of choices a man makes when he knows somebody will always be there to catch him. Not anymore. Then came the calls I'm not going to apologize for. Over the years I'd made introductions for Xavier, opened doors, called in favors, behind his. There's a certain kind of currency that takes decades to build, and it lives entirely in other people's trust. I'd spent some of mine on my son, gladly, proudly. I spent the early hours of that morning taking it back. I called men I've known for 20-25 years. I was honest without being dramatic. I told them simply that Xavier would no longer be operating with my backing, my endorsement, or my name. That any courtesies they'd been extending on my behalf should be considered concluded. Every single one of them asked if I was all right. Every single one of them respected the call without pressing for details. That's what 63 years of integrity gets you. People who trust that if Paul Jarrett is making this call, Paul Jarrett has his reasons. By 5 a.m. the streaming accounts were gone, the shared subscriptions canceled, and I had a locksmith booked for 7:30. I made myself a cup of coffee, stood at the kitchen window and watched the sky go from black to gray to the particular shade of pale blue that means morning has decided to show up whether you're ready for it or not. I thought about Dale Dalton, sitting in his house right now, Probably not sleeping either. Probably wondering what comes next. He should wonder. Because the property he came to my house to manipulate my son into signing, the one he brought paperwork for, the one he planned for 3 weeks, the one he waited until I was out of town to pursue, I'd already called my attorney at 6 a.m. Left a voicemail. The message was simple. I need to restructure the documentation on the Garrett Street property. I want it ironclad, I want it airtight, and I want it done this week. Call me when you're in. Dale Dalton would never, not in this lifetime or the next, get within legal reach of anything I built. Xavier showed up at the house at 9 a.m. I watched him from the upstairs window, saw him walk up to the front door with his shoulders set the way he sets them when he's preparing himself for a hard conversation. Watched him reach into his pocket for his key. Watched him try it. Watched him try it again. Watched him stand there for a moment, perfectly still, beginning to understand. He knocked. I didn't answer. He knocked again. Nothing. He called. His phone was dead. He stood on that porch for a long moment, looking at the door like it might change its mind, then walked to the neighbor's house, the Petersons. And I saw Barbara Peterson hand him her phone with the concerned expression of a woman who doesn't know what's happening but can feel that it's serious. My phone rang. I looked at the screen. Barbara's number. I picked up. There was a brief silence. Then, his voice was different. The defensiveness was gone. What was left underneath it was something rawer, something younger, something that reminded me painfully of the boy he used to be before the Daltons got their hands on who he was becoming. I let him have his silence. Then I said, "You let your mother lay on that floor, Xavier. You knew her condition. You knew what stress does to her body. And when she needed you, her son, you chose to go back to that table." He didn't speak. I could hear him breathing. "I love you," I said. "I will always love you. But love is not the same as access. And right now, every door I've kept open for you is closed." Another silence. Longer this time. "For how long?" he asked. Quietly. "Until you've become the kind of man who doesn't need me to answer that question for him." I hung up. I walked back to the bedroom. Angela was awake, sitting up against the pillows, morning light across her face, looking tired but present. Herself again. My wife again. She looked at me for a long moment. "Is everything okay?" she asked softly. I sat beside her, took both her hands in mine, looked at her, really looked at her, the way you look at someone when you almost lost them, and you need a moment to be grateful that you didn't. "Everything," I said, "is handled." She searched my eyes, then slowly she nodded, and she leaned her head on my shoulder. Outside, my son sat on the Petersons' front step with a dead phone and a declined card and a key that no longer worked, surrounded by the echo of every comfort I'd quietly built around him. Inside, I held my wife's hand, and for the first time since I walked through that front door, I exhaled. Some people will listen to this and say I was too hard on my son. Maybe. But I watched a paramedic, a stranger, treat my wife's crisis with more urgency than the man I raised. And I decided that night that the greatest act of love I had left for Xavier wasn't to keep the doors open. It was to finally let him feel what it costs when they close. He'll either grow from it, or he won't. But Angela is alive. She is safe. She is home. And that is the only thing that matters. If you enjoyed this story, join our community by hitting that like button and subscribing for more real, raw, and family-centered stories. And share this with someone who will love it. And as always,